For most of your life, you've been told to feed the plant. Feed it from a bag, feed it from a bottle, feed it on a schedule printed on the back in small gray letters. But the folks who fed a whole family through the Depression, and then again through the war years with a victory garden out back, knew something we've quietly set down and forgotten. They almost never fed the plant at all. They fed the ground underneath it, and they let the ground do the rest. You've likely grown more tomatoes than most people ever will. So this isn't me teaching you to garden from scratch. It's the two of us walking the row together, looking again at a handful of old, free habits, and asking a better question about each one. Not what does the plant want, but what does the soil want? 20 of them today. All free, or near enough to free that the difference isn't worth counting. Some of them your grandmother did. A few of them she got a little bit wrong, and we'll say so plainly, because a friend tells you the truth. And one of them, number 18, is the one a doctor once told a woman to give up gardening for. She didn't give up gardening. She just taught the garden to come up to meet her. Stay for that one. Start where every garden starts. Water. There was an old rule that broke every glossy magazine of its day. Never water the leaves. The leaves aren't thirsty. The roots are thirsty. So the water went underground. Here's how. Take an empty gallon milk jug, the plastic kind that empties in a day and gets tossed without a thought. Heat the tip of a small nail and poke 6 or 8 tiny holes low around the bottom. Dig a hole right beside your tomato, deep enough to sink the jug up to its neck. Leave the cap off. Fill it from the hose each evening. While you sleep, that jug lets its water down slow, 1 drop at a time, straight to the roots. The top of the soil stays dry, and dry soil surface means far less mildew and blight. Why it works is simple. Water at the root zone doesn't blow away on the wind or burn off in the noon sun the way a sprinkler's does. Buried and drip watering like this is well known to stretch your water much further than spraying overhead. And it is not new. 4,000 years ago, gardeners were burying unglazed clay pots, ollas, right in the bed, and letting the water weep out through the clay. One mistake to skip. Don't count on the buried jug for fresh sown seeds or shallow greens like lettuce, which need moisture right at the surface to sprout. Save it for the deep drinkers. Tomatoes, peppers, squash. For them, it's close to magic. If you're up early with your coffee, your plants would love a drink then too. Morning water sinks down deep before the afternoon heat can steal it back. And just as important, it gives the leaves all day to dry in the sun. Why that matters. Most leaf diseases need water sitting on the leaf for hours to take hold. Water at dawn and the leaf is dry by mid-morning. Water at dusk and that leaf stays damp all through the dark, which is exactly the long wet night that fungus, slugs, and rot are hoping for. So the habit worth keeping is this. Water early, water low, water the ground and not the plant. The mistake to let go of is the evening soak, especially if you garden somewhere humid. It feels kind at the end of a hot day, but the plant would thank you far more for the morning. A late frost in spring can break your heart in a single night. The old fix cost nothing because it was already up on a shelf. Glass jars, not for canning, for the garden. When the tender seedlings went into the cool ground in April and the nights still dipped near freezing, you carried the jars out at dusk and set one upside down over each little plant, pressing the rim gently into the soil. By morning, each seedling had spent the night in its own small greenhouse, warm and still. It's an old market garden trick, the bell jar, going back centuries. A canning jar does the same job for a few cents that a hand-blown glass cloche used to do for a small fortune. Now the one mistake you must not make. Lift those jars off by mid-morning on any sunny day. Leave them on into the noon sun and you will cook your seedlings into green soup. I have done it. I left them on while I read a book indoors, and I came back to 3 of the best tomato starts gone limp. You only need to learn that won the once. Now the soil has had its drink. Time to feed it. And here's where a few of the old stories need a gentle, honest correction, friend to friend. Start with the jar of used coffee grounds by the sink. The good news is real. Used grounds carry a fair bit of nitrogen, better than 2% by weight, and they make a fine addition to a compost pile or a thin scattering into the bed. Worms take to them. The soil life takes to them. But 2 old claims about coffee grounds simply don't hold up, and you deserve to know before you go to any trouble. First, grounds will not make your soil acidic. Dr. Linda Chalker-Scott, the horticulturist at Washington State University, who has spent years testing garden folklore against the evidence, found that used grounds sit close to neutral. the acid washed out into your cup, so sprinkling them around your blueberries won't sour the ground the way people hope. Second, a ring of grounds will not stop slugs. That one comes from a study where strong caffeine spray killed slugs. Loose grounds hold far too little caffeine to bother a slug, and being damp, they may even invite a few in. So the honest instruction is small and sure. Compost them or scatter them thin, no thicker than a coin, or they mat down like wet felt and turn water away. Feed your soil with them. Just don't ask them to do the two things they were never able to do. Here's the one almost everybody gets backwards, and it's worth slowing down for. Eggshells and blossom end rot. You know the trouble. That sunken black patch on the bottom of an otherwise perfect tomato. The old advice, passed down and printed everywhere, is to crush up eggshells for calcium, because blossom end rot is a calcium shortage. It sounds right. It's even half right. But it will not fix your tomatoes, and here is why, plainly. Blossom end rot is almost never a shortage of calcium in your soil. Your soil very likely has plenty. It's a delivery problem. When watering swings from bone dry to soaking and back, the plant can't move calcium steadily up into the fruit, and the far end of the fruit goes without. So the real cure isn't a mineral at all. It's a rhythm, steady, even watering, and a good mulch to hold that moisture level. That rot was never hungry. It was thirsty for a routine. And this is where the buried jug from number 1 quietly earns its keep. As for the eggshells themselves, they're still worth saving, just for the right reason. Whole or roughly crushed, a shell takes a very long time to break down, well over a year, so it does little for this season's plants. Ground fine and given to the compost over the long haul, it slowly adds a little calcium and grit to your soil. Long game, not quick fix. That's the honest shape of it. Same spirit here. Banana peels get talked about like a potassium jackpot. You'll see a number thrown around, that a peel is 40-some% potassium, richer than a bag of fertilizer. It isn't so, and it's worth setting straight. A dried banana peel runs closer to 9 or 10% potassium, and a fresh, wet peel, which is mostly water, is far weaker still. So it's a modest, slow feeder, not a jackpot. The viral numbers got inflated somewhere along the way these things do. Now here's the part that saves you real trouble. Burying whole peels beside a plant does very little in one season, and worse, it invites flies and digging critters and a bit of mold. So skip the buried peel ritual. The honest best use is the simplest one. Put your peels in the compost with everything else, let them break down with good company, and let that finished compost feed the whole bed. Modest potassium, released slow, exactly where the soil can use it. If you heat with wood, the gray ash from the stove is a genuine free amendment, and this one the old-timers had right. Wood ash carries real potassium, some calcium, and a scatter of trace minerals. Why it works, and its one catch, are the same fact. Wood ash is quite alkaline, a bit like garden lime. On a soil that leans too acidic, a light dusting can sweeten it and hand over some potassium at the same time. Doctor and county extension folks have long pointed to hardwood ash as a decent, free source of potash for the home garden. So the mistakes to avoid follow straight from that. Never pile it on. A very light dusting worked into the top of the soil is all the ground asks. And never put wood ash near your acid lovers, your blueberries, your rhododendrons, your potatoes. It will push their soil the wrong way. Used with a light hand, on the right bed, it's a fine thing to give back. If there's a freshwater aquarium in the house, you're pouring a mild free fertilizer down the drain every time you change the water. That cloudy, faintly pond-smelling water is rich in dilute nitrogen and trace minerals from the fish, along with the good bacteria that come with them. Aquaponics on the smallest possible scale. How to use it couldn't be simpler. When you change out a portion of the tank, that old water goes into the watering can and straight to the base of your tomatoes and peppers instead of the sink. It's gentle enough that it won't burn roots the way strong synthetic feed can. The one firm rule keeps everyone safe. Only ever use water from a plain, healthy tank. If you've treated that tank with algae control, water clarifiers, or any fish medication, it does not go on your food plants. Full stop. Plain water from a healthy tank and nothing else. No aquarium at home? A local fish store often has buckets to give away. Ask kindly and mention it's for the garden. One more correction in this group, and it's a friendly one, because the old-timers were closer to right than most modern advice. Epsom salt. It's magnesium sulfate, and magnesium sits at the heart of the green in every leaf. So when does it earn its place? Only when you actually see a magnesium shortage, and it has a signature you can read. The leaf yellows between the veins while the veins themselves stay green, like a striped sweater, usually on the older lower leaves first. See that, and a teaspoon dissolved in a gallon of water can help. But here's the honest warning that the bag will never print, and that a Washington State bulletin has stated bluntly. Do not use it out of habit. If your soil already has enough magnesium, piling on more actually crowds out calcium and can bring on the very blossom end rot you were trying to prevent. So it is not a routine tonic. It is a specific answer to a specific yellowing. When in doubt, a $2 test strip from the hardware store tells you more than any old wives' tale ever could. Before we head into the second half, a small gift. Everything we've walked through so far, the buried jug, the honest truth about eggshells and banana peels, the seasonal timing, the short list of what to skip, I've gathered onto a single page you can print and tape inside the shed door. It lays out each method the plain way, why it works, how to do it, and the one mistake to avoid. It names the honest corrections in a little box, so you never have to wonder which story's held up. And it lists real sources by name, so you can check every word for yourself. It's free. Nothing to sign up for. In a moment, there'll be a code on the screen you can point your phone at, and the page is yours. Then stay right here, because the next stretch is about keeping the soil alive, and it holds the one habit almost every one of us was taught to do every spring that quietly does more harm than good. Here's that habit. Every spring, the tiller comes out, and we churn the bed up until it's fluffy and bare. It feels like the right thing. It's the one I'd most gently ask you to set down. Under the surface of undisturbed soil runs a living web, threads of fungus, the mycorrhizae, laced through the roots, trading water and food with your plants, holding the crumb structure together. Turn that soil hard every year and you tear the web to shreds, and you drag a fresh crop of weed seeds up into the light to sprout. The old way was gentler, and it has a name now, no dig. You feed from the top. Lay your compost, your fallen leaves, your straw right on the surface, and let the worms carry it down for you, the way the forest floor has always fed itself. The old-timers called it putting the garden to bed. If your ground is packed hard as a road, loosen the top couple of inches that first year only. After that, lay the shovel down, and let the soil keep the architecture it builds. Year 1, it wakes up. By year 3, it's a different, darker, living thing under your hand. Pulling weeds is hard on the knees and the back. The old answer was to bury them instead of fighting them. Lay overlapping newspaper or plain brown cardboard over the weeds, top it with leaves or wood chips, and let it sit. Sunlight is cut off, the weeds smother, and the worms come up in their thousands to feast on the paper. By spring, soft ground and no digging. Now, honest labeling, because this one has a live debate around it. You may have heard that cardboard is full of PFAS, the so-called forever chemicals. Here's the fair version. The worry is real for certain kinds. The glossy, waxed, greasy, or heavily printed cardboard, a pizza box, a cereal box. But plain brown corrugated shipping cardboard is a much milder story, and good gardeners genuinely disagree about how much it matters at all. The evidence is still mixed. So here's the cautious path that costs you nothing. Use only plain brown corrugated cardboard. Pull off the tape and the shipping labels. Skip anything glossy, waxed, colored, or food-stained. That simple rule sidesteps the whole argument and keeps the free method that works. Here's a free one that arrives once a year and usually goes straight to the curb: the Christmas tree. In a thrifty garden, there's no such thing as trash, only something that hasn't found its place yet. Come January, take the shears to it. The small, springy branches, 5 of them lashed at the top, make a sturdy teepee for pole beans that'll last a few summers. The larger branches edge a raised bed. The trunk, sawn into rounds, becomes stepping stones through the mud. And the needles, raked up, make a lovely acidic mulch, which is just what the blueberries want. One whole tree, and not a needle wasted. Nationwide, most of these trees get thrown out and never composted, which is a small, quiet shame when a garden could use every bit of them. Yours doesn't have to be one of them. This one is free. It's a little bit magic, and unlike the eggshell story, the science is squarely on its side. If you buy a tomato seedling that's gone tall and leggy and thin, do not plant it at the depth it grew in the pot. Tomatoes, and their cousins, the peppers and eggplants, have a rare gift. They can grow fresh roots all along a buried stem. So pinch off the lower leaves, lay the stem deep, and leave only the top cluster above the soil. Every spot where a leaf used to be turns into a new root. What you get is a big, deep, drought-tough root system feeding one plant. A wobbly start becomes your strongest tomato of the year. Just remember, it's a family trick, only for the tomato family. Don't go burying the stems of beans, cucumbers, or lettuce deep, or they'll simply rot in the damp. For the tomato clan, though, deeper is stronger. When the aphids and the cabbage moths come calling, you don't need an expensive bottle off the shelf. The kitchen has always had an answer. Crush 5 cloves of garlic into 2 cups of water and let it sit overnight. Strain it well, add a single drop of plain soap so it clings to the leaf, and pour it into a sprayer. Go after the undersides of the leaves, where the aphids gather in their little green colonies. It's gentle on your wallet and gentle on the ground. 2 rules keep it kind and keep it working. First, never spray in the middle of the day when the bees are out working the flowers. Spray at dusk, when they've gone home. Second, on young tender seedlings, dilute it further, about 1 part spray to 3 parts water, or the sharp sulfur can scorch the new growth. Respect the pollinators, go easy on the young, and it'll serve you all season. Nature doesn't grow in lonely straight rows, and your garden needn't either. Companion planting is real, and it's free, as long as we're honest about which parts are proven and which are simply good company. Start with the famous pair, tomatoes and basil. Planted close, the basil's strong scent does seem to muddle the pests hunting your tomatoes, and it's a fine use of the space. You'll also hear that basil makes the tomato taste sweeter. Here's the honest truth. There's no good evidence for that one. Gardeners have sworn by it for generations, and it may just be that a healthier, better-tended plant makes a better tomato. Enjoy the pairing for the pest help and the caprese salad. Don't expect it to change the flavor. A couple that do carry more weight. Carrots and onions confuse each other's pests by smell. And marigolds are worth a word, because there's a real substance in their roots that suppresses certain root knot nematodes in the soil. The catch, told straight, is that a thin border of a few marigolds does little. To get the soil effect, you plant them thick, as a cover over a whole bed for a season. Good neighbors, then. Some proven, some just pleasant. Now you know which is which. Here's a quiet old kitchen remedy, and I'll frame it the honest way, as the folk tradition it is. The papery brown skins of your onions, saved through the winter in a paper bag. Steep a good handful in hot water overnight, and it turns the color of stained oak. Strained and watered down, gardeners have long poured it over their spring seedlings. The thinking is that onion skins hold quercetin, a compound that in the laboratory shows some action against the fungus behind damping off, that heartbreak where a healthy seedling keels over at the soil line overnight. Now, honestly, that the compound is real, and that it does something in a lab dish, is true. Whether a homemade tea does much out in your seed trays is far less certain, and I won't dress it up as settled science. But it's free, it's harmless to try, and it's the kind of small inherited ritual worth keeping for its own sake. One caution: water it into the soil, not onto leaves in hot sun, where the oils can scorch tender growth. A deer can strip 50 pounds of your hard work in a single night. You can fight that with expensive wire, or you can grow a fence that fights back and feeds you at the same time. A bramble hedge. Plant a double row of blackberries along the edge the deer come from. A thornless variety on your side, easy to pick. A good thorny variety on the outside, facing the deer. By the second summer, the hedge is tall and thick and near impossible to push through. The deer give up and move on. And every July you're carrying in enough berries for jam and pie both. And here's the part that goes beyond the fence. A living hedgerow is a whole neighborhood. Across England, where they've grown them for 2,000 years, hedgerows shelter a great share of the farmland birds. Yours will hum with bees and nesting birds and become the most alive edge of your whole garden. A fence that feeds you, feeds them, and guards the rows. Not bad for a row of berry canes. This is the one I promised you at the start, the one that matters most as the years add up. There was a woman whose back gave out at 70, after 50 years on her knees in the dirt, and the doctor told her the kind thing, that it was time to stop. She didn't stop. She went to the shed and dragged out an old wooden ladder, leaned it against the sunny wall, tied it off, and planted pole beans and cucumbers at its foot. Then an old iron bed frame wired to the fence for the tomatoes. Then a teepee of 3 broomsticks. By midsummer, her whole garden had stood up. Beans at eye level, tomatoes at the height of her face, and she never had to bend down again. That's the whole idea. and it costs nothing but a second look at what you already own. When the body gets low, send the garden higher. A ladder, a fence, a bed frame, a bit of old pipe, a trellis of sticks, anything a bean or a cucumber or a small squash can climb. It saves your back, it saves your knees, it keeps the fruit clean and easy to spot, and it keeps you out there in the fresh air for years longer than kneeling ever would. Gardening should not have to hurt us. Let the plants do the climbing, so your back can do the resting. 2 small free ones, because they save real money and real heartache. First, a length of old aluminum rain gutter, the kind that comes off a house in a storm. Plug the ends with a scrap of wood, fill it with seed-starting mix, and set it on the windowsill. You've a whole nursery of lettuce and pea and tomato starts in a row. Here's the clever part. Come planting time, you don't pull each seedling and shock its roots. You dig one trench, tilt the gutter, and the whole ribbon of soil and seedlings slides out together, straight into the ground. No root disturbance, no transplant shock, not one lost start. Farmers were sliding rice seedlings out of split bamboo the very same way centuries ago, and the label to go with them. Cut an empty ice cream tub into markers and write on them with an ordinary pencil, not a marker. A marker bleaches blank in one summer of sun. Pencil graphite is just carbon, and it does not fade in the light. That name will still be readable years from now for the cost of nothing at all. And the last one brings us all the way around. The seed itself. There were gardeners who never once bought a seed packet in 50 years. They traded for every seed they grew. A paper envelope handed across a church pew or a fair table, a name penciled on the front, a variety carried in one family for generations. The seed is not for sale, they'd say. It is a promise. You'll hear a striking number attached to this, that 90% of the vegetable varieties grown in this country a century ago are gone. Here's the honest version, because you deserve it. That figure comes from an old comparison, and researchers have argued back and forth about it. Some found that when you count differently, the overall variety hasn't collapsed the way that number suggests. What is fair to say is this. A great many specific old varieties did fall out of the seed catalogs, and the ones still with us are still with us, because someone chose to save and share them. And that part you can do. Check your library. More of them run free seed libraries now, where you check out a packet like a book. Save the seed from your best tomato this year. Hand a neighbor an envelope. Keep the promise moving. Look back at all 20, and you'll see the truth hiding in plain sight. Almost none of them are really about the plant. They're about the ground it stands in, and about a way of looking at the world. The gardeners who knew these by heart weren't being clever. They were being polite. They looked at a milk jug, an eggshell, a fallen tree, a handful of onion skins, and asked the same quiet question about each one. Where does this belong? And they gave it a place. I spent years feeding the plant the way the bag told me to, before I understood they were never feeding the plants at all. They were feeding the ground beneath them and letting the ground do the rest. You don't have to try all 20 today. Just pick one. Poke a hole in a milk jug. Grind a shell for the compost. Lay a shovel down and leave the soil be. Step outside. Take a slow breath of that air, and know you're taking your place in a long, patient line of gardeners who fed the soil and let it feed them back. If this is the kind of gardening you come from, or the kind you'd like to grow into, then you already belong here. Subscribe, and let's keep tending the old, honest way together.